Welcome back to Tide Pod, your home and best home for all things Alabama football and men's basketball. We got a big one here coming up this Saturday. The Crimson Tide facing LSU this Saturday down in Tuscaloosa. Brandon Howard's with me as well. Tony couldn't join us this week, but we got Brandon. So it'll be a two-man show for this time around. Brandon's getting the hat on, finishing the fit off for those on the YouTube. But yeah, Brandon, it's LSU week, or it's been LSU week. We're nearing the game. Obviously recording this here on a Thursday. But just your kind of opening impressions before we dive into some specifics on how you're feeling about Alabama this week and their chances heading into the weekend.
Opening impressions is that this is a big game, biggest one of the year. I don't think anybody else could put it any other way. That's why college game day is in town. Um, I'm expecting a loud crowd. I think the game time is conducive of what most people want this game to be, the spotlighted game, the game that the West usually depends on. And with LSU still with a breath, you definitely want to put them away if you're an Alabama fan, and make sure that it's a dominant performance, so you benefit on the field and in the eyes of the college football voters, college football playoff voters, and then also off the field, with recruiting, because it should be a packed house this weekend, and I think the list is growing and should only get bigger by Saturday.
Yeah, we'll get to that too, because I'm curious to ask, just about that list, some of those guys that'll be in attendance. But yeah, you mentioned putting LSU away. That's exactly what the Tigers did last year in Baton Rouge, taking down Alabama in that overtime game, by one. And it seems like that's been the vibe of a lot of these players. They seem to be taking this personal, of course, coming off the bye week. I'll use the words of Chris Braswell, who said it's very personal for us this whole bye week. We're taking it as a personal matter, and even this week. So, yeah, and J.C. Latham, Alabama's right tackle, added some context to that, and just adding that there's a lot of motivation to beat them. Given what happened last year, and all the context around it, and then what Alabama has been this year, where it's been, you've been skating on thin ice since that Texas game. Your college football playoffs, can go away with any slip up, and this is obviously a huge one, or a huge, possibility of that, I guess I should say, with LSU coming to town. So let's get to some of the specifics, Brandon. I've got some numbers to rattle off to you on this LSU Tigers team. 552 total yards of offense per game. They average 8.09 yards per play, 217 first downs, 26 passing touchdowns, and they have the number one scoring offense and total offense. All those stats I read to you, they're number one in the country in all of them. This team, this Brian Kelly team, is obviously led by its offense. We've seen it all season long. What are some factors of this LSU offense that are, or even personnel that are kind of key to hone in on this weekend, that Alabama will look to attempt to try to stop, do their best, as everyone has, to slow down this weekend?
I mean, I think everything starts. It almost ends with the quarterback. You know, I looked at his numbers the other day, and I was surprised that he had that many touchdowns. You look at their games, and you see shootouts, you see some high scoring affairs. But when you look and you hear numbers, they definitely catch your attention. I think Alabama's defense will definitely have an opportunity to show, who they are on probably the biggest moment of the season. I think Tennessee was a good warm up, but LSU comes in with a point to prove, and with a receiving core that weapons like Brian Thomas, where you throw it up to him, and he's due to make a big play. I think their stable of running backs is definitely something where you can change the pace, and give Alabama quite a bit to consider as far as how to stop them offensively. Just because the dual threat ability of their quarterback, putting up Heisman like numbers. This weekend sets up for a Heisman like moment if he were were to have one.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned all the weapons that he can, unleash at any given time. It's so difficult. Like we've seen even in LSU's games where they've lost, they've all been shootouts, and they're still, they've been in touching distance in every single game they've won. You could say they've gotten a bit unfortunate, and they haven't lost to bad teams. Florida State and Ole Miss being their two losses, is nothing to be ashamed of in any way, and it's why they obviously still have a chance even with those two losses. Should they beat Alabama and get back to the SEC championship, maybe even have their college playoff hopes alive. You mentioned Brian Thomas. Malik Neighbors is the other obviously big name there at wide receiver. 981 yards, 9 touchdowns, 981 yards, of course, number one in the country. No one has been able to stop Malik Neighbors. And I'm kind of curious your take on where you think maybe Kool-Aid McKinstry and some of this secondary, like, can they step up? Do you think they'll be able to get, even just if it comes down to this game's a shootout, they need one stop, do you trust those guys from what you've seen so far from Bama's secondary to kind of get that job done?
I don't, really expect this game to get in the 40s if Bama is expecting to win. So, if it's a shootout like that, I'm not high on that personally. I think the defense will come ready to play. I think again the Tennessee game was a good test. High tempo offense. Tennessee's had their struggles this year, but to get down like that, I don't overlook that as a team. What that does for you, and kind of give that confidence that it gives you, especially in the second half, to be as dominant as they were. LSU definitely has put up some numbers this year, but you look at some of the games against Florida State, they didn't put up the best numbers. I think they had 24 points in that game. So in a big moment like that, and even against Ole Miss, it was a shootout, and Ole Miss, we saw what they did against Alabama earlier this year. There wasn't that much firepower whenever they played Alabama. So just being in Tuscaloosa, in Bryant-Denny, you're definitely going to expect the crowd to play a tremendous factor. And based on what LSU did last year, storming the field, that's something I can't overlook. Just someone who just analyzes the game. And so I expect Saban to have the team ready to play, not caught off guard, where, we're looking at, maybe in the 30s range, but the defense will make some plays. They'll have, a turnover or two. And I think, they'll step up when needed.
Yeah, I like that take. I think it's as many shootouts as LSU has been in, that's often what they want, and there's been teams that are able to hang around with that. But I agree. I don't know that Alabama necessarily can, nor will they want to. I think you're right. They're a lot happier if this game ends in sort of like a 30 something to 20 something, kind of range, like you said. I think I want to go back to that because I think we talked about this a little last time. I think, was it you that had the storming the field take where you said a team like LSU shouldn't be storming the field when they get a win like that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's tradition that goes with college football, right? And there's certain programs that at the end of the day, they're the big brother, not the little brother. And so we often see Auburn, whenever they win a big game, they're on the field. Somehow they're on the field, like almost for any occasion, they find their way on the field. You don't see Ohio State storm the field too much, like almost ever. You don't see, Texas really storm. You really don't even see Texas storm the field. I mean, even though they've had their recent struggles, you don't see Georgia, you don't see Alabama do that. So, I just believe that whenever you start to get into the mode of storming the field, you just gave, you said we're inferior to you. We're not supposed to beat you. And for a team like LSU, like they may have had one off year, but they shouldn't be storming the field after beating Alabama. Like they shouldn't. I was confused by that situation personally.
No, I don't hate that take at all. It's like it gives you like a little brother persona, kind of. It's like, yeah, you're right. We're not supposed to beat you. So when we do, it's special. But obviously, if Alabama lets that happen again, there's going to be a lot of talk about, who might the little brother be, or if LSU can kind of, they've won, I think since 2007, they've only beaten Alabama 4 times, but granted, 2 of those have come in the last couple of years. So, it goes back to Alabama kind of having that point to prove, and some of those guys taking it personally. And that's where I'll turn next, in terms from your perspective. And I'm curious, to get your take on this with the recruiting like lens over it too. Who are you watching first off, just as from a fan perspective, like as a playmaker, who could make a play for Alabama, and then some of the guys that you've had on your radar recruiting over the years that are now here. Is there anyone maybe that could come as a surprise and make a play and step up on Saturday?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, for Alabama, Jalen Milroe is a guy you have to continue to just, that's the obvious one. But I mean, how is he going to play? This is a big moment for him. He's had his ups and he's had, a few downs, maybe some second halves that you wish you could have seen more production. But I mean, I think the ball begins with him, and then in the receiving core, I would like to see just across the board what that depth is going to look like because, LSU, they may have their guys they go to, the neighbors, the Thomases of the world. But at the same time, like they have other guys that are still in the mix. They're still distributing the ball, pretty fairly. So I just want to continue to see how Alabama opens the offense up. Maybe a appearance of Jalen Hale. We saw him earlier. Just like someone else who can create offensively, and give Alabama something different to look at.
Yeah, definitely. I think it'll be interesting. Like it's everyone's going to kind of have to step up and make plays, and I think more importantly, and this is something that it seems like Saban has emphasized really all year for this team in particular, but this week especially, is like honing in on mistakes and making sure every play is like just about as perfect as it can be, especially on the defensive side of the ball. He talked about how LSU is so well disciplined and they do so much with their offense in terms of changing plays at the line, manipulating where they're going and switching stuff up. In Alabama on the defensive side, I think that's what I kind of expect to see is how they step up. I do want your thoughts on the offensive side of the ball though. And I'm stealing this take partially from Tony, but he's not here, so he can't defend himself and say it for himself. So I'm stealing it. He wrote in his Tony's Takes article, his prediction is that Jace McClellan is going to have over 100 rushing yards in this game, which I thought was really interesting considering, LSU's front is one, already not the best. And two, it's actually a little battered up. I know their defensive tackle, Mekhi Wingo, is not playing in this game. He's one of their better guys up front. I'm curious your take on that. Do you think, the running game could be the thing that makes the difference for Alabama's offense?
I think it has to. I mean, the passing game is still on its way, right? We've seen some production, but it's still on its way. I think, for Alabama to get Jace going at the rate of, rushing over 100 yards would speak volumes to not only what he would be able to do on Saturday, but also most likely what Milroe would be able to do in some production, from the backups to Jace. So, in order to see Jace, have a big game, I think that would speak highly of, what Alabama is going to do on Saturday and would most likely result in a win. If they're looking to win, they want to definitely run the football.
Yeah, I mean, like it's not set in stone that you're just going to cut up this defense, through the air. Like, yes, it's ranked like I think 88th in pass defense, gives up like 230 passing yards a game or something. But there is that balance there that I think Saban, like you said, the passing game is still in development. They're still trying to strike that balance between their rushing attack and their passing attack. And this would be as good of a game as ever to do it. And to also probably alleviate some pressure on your defense, who's going to be trying to make basically just one stop to try and win this game. That's what it'll likely come down to. So I agree. I think that'll be huge, and we'll see.
You're
see if
Tony's. You're high on that one stop, huh? Like I don't know.
I think
I don't know if it's gonna go down like that, man.
You think it'll be? You think? I mean, you said a turnover. I think you think Alabama will
So
get a
LSU
turnover?
is just they're just like that. They're going to go into Tuscaloosa and they're just going to throw the football. I mean, like, I'm just speaking outside looking in, like, they're just going to throw the football all over the place. Alabama's not going to make any turnovers. Like, so that's how we view Alabama's defense these days, that they don't just, they don't show up. I can't say that.
That's
I can't
that's
say
a
it's
good
going to
point.
be a shootout in Tuscaloosa yet.
That's a good point. I mean, I am probably giving a little bit too much credit to LSU's offense and not enough to what like is still a very, very elite unit for Alabama. And I think it goes back to our secondary conversation. I mean, like Kool-Aid McKinstry is a dog. Like he if there's somebody who you're going to want to throw on a Neighbors or a Brian Thomas and is going to come up with a pick or a takeaway, it's him. I guess I've just, maybe from my outside perspective, just seen the numbers and I'm like, this LSU offense is just scary. Like I remember 2019 when they had all those guys. I don't think it's as good as that team, but
that's what it sounded like a little bit. That's what it sounded like. I mean, if Alabama and Saban don't get any credit for being able to develop their players over a course of a season, then I guess that's just maybe the popcorn mentality that we have. That if it's not rolling for a team like at the beginning of a year, that it just doesn't get rolling. But I mean, I just don't overlook that Tennessee win and the way it happened, and suddenly the cigars come out, and they're just very. I think there could be a very focused Alabama team that, as people on the outside look in, and they say that they're going to get carved up. It's a one-stop game. I mean, just like you're probably going to see Georgia respond on Saturday to being ranked number 2. I could see the same thing with Alabama being ready to respond, to some of the criticisms that, they don't stop people on defense anymore. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from people. And I can't bet against Saban still.
Yeah. No, I think you make a really good point. I mean, if there's one guy that, gets his team right when it matters, it is Nick Saban. So yeah, I could see that too. But to the opposite end, I mean, LSU, like, they're playing for their lives as well. If they don't come out and do what they know how to do best, they could get in trouble quickly. And I guess, it'll just have to be maybe just what unit kind of comes out and dominates. I guess we'll see. And that's where, I probably lean toward Bama too, because they are at home. They are hungry. They lost last year and they have, they can't afford to do it this year. You make some very valid points. It'll be interesting. I wouldn't mind a shootout.
Don't get me wrong though. Alabama can lose on Saturday. Like I'm not saying that. And, we'll get to predictions later. I'm just saying, to the tune of LSU walking in and scoring 45-24. Like, do you see that? Like, I just don't see that right now. Like, LSU went into Tuscaloosa and just dropped 45. Like, that's that's the vibe I'm getting. So I don't know. Maybe you see that though.
Yeah, no, the more I think about it, the more I don't. And I was looking at this for my numbers story, and I think the last time they scored over 40 in Tuscaloosa was in like 07. I think in that last win, or in that win a long time ago now. So that doesn't tend to happen often in Bryant-Denny. And I mean, yeah, I think Saban will have his guys ready. I think the over under I saw earlier was like 60.5. And I was very much, when I saw that, I was like, I lean, I think, on the under on that one, unless one team really takes it to him, which doesn't feel like it'll happen. Other narrative in this game too, of course, this is the return. Alabama's OC Tommy Rees, who worked under Brian Kelly previously. Is there any take you got on that in terms of how an OC approaches going against an old coach like that?
I mean, we could always talk about tendencies, but even Sanders said you can know somebody's game plan, you still have to stop it. And LSU has their deficiencies on defense, so it gives Reese the opportunity to have his quarterback ready and make plays and really kind of end the discussion, because if the offense comes out shooting, the game could get out of hand, in Alabama's favor, right? So it's an opportunity for him to go against a old friend, and now he's just a foe.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's got to just always be interesting, that dynamic of, like, does it make a coach overthink? I'm not worried about Tommy Rees, I don't think, doing any of that, but it's obviously a good narrative to look into that. The other thing I wanted to bring up with you, and I was listening to the coaches teleconference, and Saban and Kelly both talked about this. We've got a lot of things changing in the SEC with these two new teams coming in. The schedule is going to change going forward. We know they're doing the 8-game next year. But the future of this rivalry, Saban, kind of really interestingly, I know a while back, was sort of against the idea of Alabama having those 3 permanent rivals in Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU given that, his argument was these teams are all powerhouses. Usually at least two of them are always really good. That gives us a lot tougher of a calendar every year than other teams. And then this week, he kind of seemed to lean more into I like keeping these rivalries intact for the sake of fans, to enjoy and to keep having these games. And LSU is obviously, it could be the rivalry on the chopping block depending on what schedule model they go with. I'm just curious your take on all of that and scheduling models. And, we could talk forever about that if we wanted to. That can get into a whole different discussion. But just, kind of your thoughts on that, especially, given that it's so close and this could be, depending on how it goes long term, maybe one of the last times we see this game for a bit, or maybe not.
I definitely still believe in the tradition of college football. So if we can keep the rivalries of Alabama and LSU, and like the big time rivalries, I think they should stay intact. I mean, Alabama Tennessee, we just saw that was like a great game. I mean, sometimes you just have to pay the price for being at the top, and you're going to face stiff competition anyway. And with the playoff model changing, the amount of losses that you have, you're going to see 2 and 3 with just like how that's coming to be. And most times Alabama's going to get the push for it anyway. So they may get beat up then, but if you get in the college football playoff and you go win a national championship, are you really too concerned with who you played, especially if you get to keep the tradition that is, college football? I like the tradition of college football. I like the traditions.
I do too. I am totally in favor of whatever rivalries you can keep intact, you should keep intact. And yeah, I mean it like you said, like yeah, it stinks if you're playing traditional college football powerhouses, but it's Alabama, so are you, and that's just kind of how it goes. So I think Saban, like the vibe I got, he seems to kind of be in that camp as well now, where he kind of understands that fans want this, they appreciate still being able to have these games. And I think he understands that importance. But that's something obviously hanging, kind of over this game here on Saturday is what the future of that might hold, because the SEC still is figuring that out. They're going to do the 8-game conference next year, or the 8-game schedule next year, but LSU is still on the docket for that. I think, I'm hopeful those rivalries will still get to probably be kept intact. I'm pretty confident in that. Okay, Brandon, recruiting wise, for this game, you teased it earlier. You said there's likely going to be a pretty big list. What should people know about recruiting people that are going to be there, and even just updates from this past week with stuff you've learned?
Yeah, I think this weekend is going to be fairly full. You're going to see recruits from across the country. There's been a couple names that have kind of fell my way that I think from Alabama perspective, they could be trending for several targets. Right now, the class is at 20 for 2024, but we're looking to at a number of 31, including transfers and then actual outright commitments. Last week, I put in 4 future cast. So some of those to look out for. I have a story on that later. But just going into this weekend, you see the return of Caleb Cunningham. I think that starts to become an interesting story. The number 17 player in the country. With us already having a number 2 ranked class in 2025, there are several names that are starting to bubble that would potentially join that group. And so Caleb Cunningham could be one of those names as well. And you add him to Jamie French, who's supposed to be in town as well this weekend, and then Ryan Williams. There's no doubt that receiving class would start to give Alabama fans memories of a couple past groups as well. And then on the defensive side, you have a commitment of Zion Grady coming up November 12th. So a big moment for him. I think Alabama has definitely started to make quite the impression. He's made a number of visits this season. And right now, I think the Tide's standing in a strong point. But outside of that, the list will continue to grow. Lamar Brown will be in town this weekend, another big time target. And you'll see several commits in town because at the end of the day, looking to close out this group, there are a lot of names still on the board that Alabama's in the mix for.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I figured it should be a big weekend, and they'll want to put on a show for some of those future guys. I know at least one past guy is coming back too after Monday Night Football, Jahmyr Gibbs said he's going to be back in town for that game because the Lions are on their bye week. So that'll be fun. Maybe they got to figure out a way to get the future guys with some of these NFL guys. That seems like that'd be a good selling point for me.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, they're doing it all over the place. And at the end of the day, Alabama has some of the greatest alumni out there. So
oh yeah.
I'm sure the players want to connect with them.
Oh, trust me. I was doing my Crimson Tide in the NFL article, and I'm like, oh my Lord, it's every team. It's, there's a ton of examples you can turn to. But yeah, big weekend, of course, for Alabama recruiting. All right, Brandon, it's that time. We mentioned predictions. I want to get yours because I think you're convincing me to audible a little bit from what I originally was gonna pick.
No,
But
stick
what do you
with what you were gonna do. Stick with what you were gonna do.
All right, yeah, I'll get to mine, but you go ahead. What do you got on Saturday score wise, and your winner in this big one?
That's tough. So late night contest. You lose last year on the road in overtime. They go for 2. They storm the field. People question your defense the entire offseason. Do you beat that team a year later? I think it's a tough one, right?
It's very tough. Yeah, it could go a number of ways.
Man, that's crazy. I mean, I'm gonna just trust in what I know, what I believe that I could do in Vegas, and I'll just go 31-27 LSU.
Oh, you're picking the Tigers.
Yeah, I mean, if that's allowed, I have to.
Oh, that's allowed. You gotta go with your gut. So okay, so yeah, LSU. You think they're gonna pull the double over the Tide?
I mean, it doesn't seem like they will, especially if it's a late night game. But they'll show up to play because it's a late night game. They're not going to run from that environment. It doesn't seem like they'll beat like Alabama will let them be beat twice, and just because of what's on the line. But I felt this way about the Texas game. I knew about the Texas game. I just decided to just go with Bama just to go with Bama. But like I can't do it twice. And so I think just quarterback play. Milroe's been better, but can he be consistent? Because he's gonna have to. He's gonna have to like duel a little bit. Like I just don't feel like it's going to be the same situation as Tennessee, which that Tennessee win was big, but I just don't see it. I don't see them just stopping them for an entire second half because they have like a quarterback who is a quarterback more so than like a system, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, I think LSU just will like there's type of guys who will rise to the challenge, and I just don't know if Jalen Milroe can give me enough. I mean, I would almost want to give him like 34-30 still LSU, but even I'll stick with my original 31-27 just because I just don't know if he can give you that many points.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that thought too. Like, this game can't go. The start of it can't go how it went against Tennessee because LSU will just keep their foot on the gas at that point. Their offense is just too good. And yeah, I mean, it's going to have to be Milroe's best game. It's going to have to be everyone's best game. But it's easy to, like you said, it sometimes starts and ends with the guy taking the snaps. So, you make a good point. Okay, I was initially thinking 35-27 Alabama. And I do think I'll lean on they get that one stop late on and are able to just kind of hold on. They're able to go shot for shot. Milroe does have the game, that Alabama needs him to have. They show up ready and the defense does just enough to make a stop and kind of hold off this LSU onslaught or passing attack, whatever you want to call it. So I'll pick Bama. Is it a bit of an emotional hedge for the, you pick LSU and then if you're right, you're right, or if you're wrong, it's a Bama win?
What do you mean?
So I've done that. I've done that plenty.
What do you mean?
Like an emotional hedge. So like you pick LSU, if LSU wins, you got your pick right, but if Bama wins, it's a Bama win.
Yeah, it's always a hedge bet. Like, at the end of the day, if Alabama wins, it'll be like it will have more enjoyment for me just in the aspect of the follow-up process. But, if they don't win, it has a little bit more of a unique follow-up process than the win does, So for the sake of the season still being very prominent, I definitely want the win.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so does everyone in Tuscaloosa on Saturday, and they need it. I mean, they've known what's in front of them since that Texas game that you brought up. It's pretty much win or go home with how good this SEC West has been. So, we'll see. We'll see what the Crimson Tide can do here on Saturday. With that, we'll segue. We're going to finish the show. I'm going to talk to our Tide Illustrated basketball insider, Jordan Harper. We're going to do a little basketball preview. We talked some basketball last week, but we're 4 days away from Crimson Tide basketball, which I'm very, very excited for. So we're going to talk about that to close out the show. Okay, we're going to shift focus a little bit because we are 4 days away from Alabama men's basketball, and we have the one, the only Tide Illustrated's senior men's basketball insider. I've dubbed him that new title. That is what he'll be now. Jordan Harper's coming on the show to help us preview. Jordan, just first impression. First off, how you doing? And then first impressions, just kind of on the team before we dive into some specifics here. Getting geared up for the season.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's probably the best introduction I've had in my life. So yeah, that is thank you for that. But yeah, I'm doing great, man. I appreciate you having me on. We got a great team here at Tide Illustrated and love to be a part of this. Love what you're doing with this podcast. I think it's going to really get a lot of our subscribers and fans of Alabama basketball and football really informed. But overall, with Alabama basketball, it's definitely a fall off from last year. I mentioned to you before, I feel like last year was probably the ceiling for Alabama basketball, regular season wise. I feel like postseason they still have something else to offer. They just keep getting cold in the postseason, which that'll turn around eventually with more games they play. But with this specific team, you lose 8 guys. You only have 4 returning players, I should say. Mark Sears and Rylan Griffin being really the only 2 key contributors. Nick Pringle's going to have a bigger role coming in, but you lose a lot of production. You lose the number 2 overall pick and Brandon Miller, the 21st overall pick, and Noah Clowney. Lose some big transfers in the backcourt: Jaden Bradley, Namari Burnett, Javon Quinterly. So you lose a lot of production, but I feel like you gain a lot more experience as well, mixed with some good youth too. So you lose some youth, gain a really good freshman recruiting class that I feel like has some gems in it, particularly Sam Walters, and we'll probably cover him in a minute. But you've got a good mix of guys here. You can't win in college basketball with nothing but freshmen, high-profile freshmen. You see that year in and year out with Duke and Kentucky. You got to have veteran guys, and I feel like Grant Nelson, Aaron Estrada, 2 transfers that Nate Oates brought in over the offseason, are going to be, the engine that makes this team go. And that's just college basketball we're living in right now. Of you flip rosters every year and you try to get the best transfers out there. And I feel like they got 2 of the top 10 transfers in the country in Grant Nelson and Aaron Estrada. And I feel like those 2 and Mark Sears are going to be the difference makers for this team. Nate Oates relies on his backcourt to make good decisions and hit threes. And honestly, this might be the biggest team that Alabama's had in the past, and especially with Nate Oates. I mean, you saw they had Grant Nelson starting at the 3 at 6'11". You have Jaron Stevenson at 6'11", starting at the 4, and then Nick Pringle, I think, probably 6'10", 6'11" now, based on what I've been seeing in pictures. So this could be the biggest team Nate Oates has had. I think defense is going to be the weak point. But Nate Oates' team always figures it out on defense, seems like, by the end of the year. So I'm really excited. I feel like this could be a very up and down year, but exciting nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like, I think it was going to be pretty much impossible for, almost any team with how well or not well they reload to live up to what Alabama did in the regular season last year. I am curious though, was it kind of expected that they would lose the amount of guys that they did? Cause like, obviously Brandon Miller, you knew was going to be the one and done that he was. And then Clowney turned, his freshman year into a great performance. Bediako, decided to test the waters as well. But you mentioned some of those other guys that decided to hit the portal rather than maybe stay and try and run something back. Was that kind of to be expected, or did some of those guys come at a bit of surprise?
I think a couple came as a surprise. The rest I could feel coming. You knew Brandon and Noah weren't going to stay another year just because they had a great year last year, and they're primed to play in the NBA. I mean, Brandon Miller's averaging 17 in his first 3 to 4 games right now. I mean, he's killing it. So you've got Charles Bediako that left, I think, is the most surprising. I didn't feel like he had a good enough grade to get drafted. And if it was going to be late second, which you're not guaranteed a spot. And he was going to be a key cog in this defense coming back. And now you lose him and forces guys like Nick Pringle to step up. But losing Charles Bediako was a surprise. I kind of feel like losing Javon Quinterly was a surprise. You never know what you're going to get with him. He seems like he wears his heart on his sleeve, as you can tell when he plays. So it's not out of the ordinary that he makes a decision like this. And I've heard he was back and forth throughout the offseason of leaving, staying, leaving, staying. And he entered the portal the year before. So it's not like it should come as a surprise that he got in the portal again. But the fact that he stayed in, I think, was a little bit of a surprise. But Jaden Bradley and Amari Burnett, I did not think was a surprise just because you saw their roles diminish at the end of the year. Jaden Bradley just couldn't get it going shooting wise. I thought he was a great ball handler. I thought he was a great passer. Get to the rim anytime he wanted to, just couldn't finish. He had no outside shot. And Amari Burnett, I mean, it stinks for him just because he got injured early on, injured that wrist, and just couldn't ever get it going. And I just feel like he was going to get lost in the shuffle, go transfer portal, not guaranteed playing time. So he went up north to Michigan. I feel like he'll have a good role up there. And then Jaden Bradley, we'll see again in Arizona. So I feel like they made it. That just shows what kind of talent they are, man. They went from Alabama to Michigan and Arizona, so they were very talented. But it was just I just fit. Sometimes it just doesn't work out in college basketball.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's kind of the uniqueness of it is it's like, yeah, these guys didn't transfer down. Their role wasn't diminished because they weren't necessarily talented. It was just, personnel and fit. But nevertheless, Oates went out and he rebuilt. He had a very good 2023 class. And like you mentioned, it's not all freshmen. He brought in some extremely talented transfers who we've already seen a little bit. And that's kind of where I want to turn to next. This team's played a couple exhibitions. They had a super secret scrimmage against TCU. I put that in quotes for those who are listening and not watching on the YouTube. But they had that game against TCU and then the game against Wake Forest, which I know did not end up being very well for them, especially in the second half. But I want to ask, you mentioned the size. How different is this team going to look? And then what were some of your observations from those two exhibition games?
Well, to answer the roster construction of how different this lineup's going to look is it's going to be more versatile than last year, in my opinion. I feel like it was a set lineup every single game last year. Now you can play to other teams' strengths. If you're going up against a Tolu Smith or a larger Mississippi State team, you could start Grant into 3, still stretch the floor there. Jaron Stevenson can still stretch the floor at 4. And then you got Nick Pringle down low, in the dunker spot. So you got guys or the personnel. And Muhammad Wagi, we haven't even mentioned him because he's injured. He's a great rim runner and rim protector as well, transfer from West Virginia. So you got the personnel and Muhammad Diabate. I mean, you just roll out the forwards.
Goes on and on.
The funny thing is that when Miller, Bediako, Clowney, all those guys left, you're like, goodness, who's going to play forward for Alabama? You got Nick Pringle, and is Ryland going to play the 4? Like, what's going to happen? And then Nate Oates just flipped it in the offseason and got all these big guys that have all one thing in common in terms of the stretch guys. They can shoot. You got Grant and Jaron that can shoot the 3, and that's basically replacing Noah Clowney, even though you can't, replace the effort that Noah gave every single day. But you have lineup to where you can roll out bigs and face a bigger team. I mean, they're going to have to against Zach Edey when they play Purdue in Canada. And then you got a good backcourt and wing combo to where you can play small. If you wanted to play Mark Sears at the 1, Estrada at the 2, Griffin at the 3, And if Reitzel gets going, I mean, you could swap Ryland and Reitzel in at the 3. So you got a lot of pieces to where you can kind of mix and match based on matchup. And I just didn't feel like they had that last year. And it kind of got exposed in some areas or in some games.
Yeah, definitely. I really am enticed by if they go against, if they go kind of small ball, the potential of Sears, Estrada, and Reitzel. Like, we don't need to get too nitty gritty. Obviously, in the preseason, we got to see how stuff plays out. But I think that's a super exciting, like, different look than, like you said, kind of the fixed situation they were in last year, which again was down to personnel. You had all those talented guys. You needed them playing your big minutes. But yeah, in terms of what you saw. Then those 2 scrimmages against TCU and Wake Forest. Who are some of the guys that jumped off the page? I have a feeling one of them will be a guy who we talked about last time, Mr. Sam Walters, who has stolen the show a little bit as a freshman. But yeah, what kind of has jumped out to you so far from everybody in those 2 exhibitions?
Yeah, you can tell that there's still some camaraderie to be gained from this team, some chemistry. They give up a lot of big runs scoring wise, and they go on big scoring runs. So it's kind of, leveling that out to play a complete game. So I don't take much from these scrimmages. It's good for guys like Sam to get on the map, though. That one performance definitely jumped out at people. You're starting to see people that might not have ever heard of Sam Walters put them on their top 10 impact freshmen in the SEC list that are coming out right about now. Because I guarantee you, before that scrimmage, he probably wasn't going to be on there. You might see Jaron Stevenson because of his recruiting ranking, but you weren't going to see Sam. I've known Sam for probably, not known him personally, but I've known of Sam for probably 2 to 3 years since he was in about 8th, 9th, 10th grade, going into his sophomore year. And I talked to one of my South Florida, Mid-Florida, Central Florida correspondents, and he told me that when I told him that we were recruiting Sam Walters, he's like, man, that guy's had it since 8th grade. Like, when he stepped on the floor, he was probably about already 6'7", 6'8" in the 8th, 9th grade. And he was playing AAU ball at a high level. And they're like, that dude's going somewhere when he gets a senior. And it's just kind of got boring for him. You would see him in the highest tier of AAU ball this past, his senior year summer. And it was just like he was bored. He'd put up 25, 30 a night, and it was just effortless for him. Now, he doesn't have the athleticism. He's not very big. He's probably about 6'10", skinny as a stick, and he doesn't move very well. But goodness, you don't have to when you score. I mean, look at Kevin Durant. I mean, if you shoot that well and you know how to score, that translates to any level of basketball. And I'm really excited to see him. I don't think he's going to have a large impact right away. I could see, early on they kind of mix and match, and he might play 20 minutes here and there early on to kind of see what works. But when the lineups start leveling out, I think when you start getting into tougher competition, he's probably going to struggle. So that it really depends on how he reacts and adjusts to that. But I think you throw him in there as an energizer type player off the bench, give you 10 to 12 minutes of good ball and just shooting threes. He can probably score you 8 to 10 points most every night if he shot 7, 8 times. So he's a guy that is a lottery ticket, really, is if he becomes something that we saw in that scrimmage, Alabama's ceiling just got that much higher because that's someone you didn't expect to perform right away at that level. But overall, the TCU scrimmage I thought was encouraging. TCU is a very tough team, really good team, probably a top 30-ish team, top 30, top 35 team most of the year. And only playing 8 players, I thought they did really well to only lose by 4. And Sam had the great game. Aaron Estrada had a great game. I thought Grant had a good game based on the box score. So obviously 3-point shooting was kind of the concern. But the Wake Forest game, elite first half and nothing the second half. Like, I was following it on radio, and it was just like Alabama couldn't miss the first half, just going these huge runs. And it's like, man, they're going to blow them out of the water. And second half,
it's game of runs.
It is not a 23-4 run you wouldn't expect, but Nate Oates started tinkering with lineups a little bit the second half, which is what you do in a scrimmage. You're not trying to go all out and to win the scrimmage. Obviously, it's good to win anything, but he was trying a lot of different things, and it was not working. And wait for it. And Nate Oates, just let his kids play. If it was a regular game, he probably would have called timeouts, but he let his kids play, try to figure it out. It's the best time to grow. So I didn't take too much away. It was discouraging in the second half. They just went ice cold, but encouraging to see kind of the potential in the first half of what this team can be offensively.
Definitely. Yeah. I think, Oates has been vocal about that TCU scrimmage last year where they lost by about 30 and how helpful that was for them. So just the fact that they're doing this, I think, is probably the best thing you can take away in terms of you're getting guys experience. Like you said, it seems like this group has some gelling still to do. And, what better way to do it than at least being live action and going and trying to figure stuff out, dealing with some adversity in a situation that doesn't necessarily matter just yet. As we get into the preseason. But yeah, they're, you mentioned like all those guys you said pretty much, solely newcomers. I know they've been without Sears, and he should be good to go when the regular season starts, I believe. But, it seems like some of those guys are embedding pretty well. And I want to talk about, that in terms of like, we talked a little bit about lineups already, but, it seems like there's a couple guys on this team that their seasons can go, sort of one way or the other directionally. Like, Nelson, I think there's been like some talk all over the board for him in terms of like what he can turn this season into. And it's really exciting. Sam Walters, Jaron Stevenson, even Rylan Griffin, who like I've circled as, I think with the way he's his build and just the way he plays, I think he could be primed for a breakout year. But I'm curious, like, individually, who are you maybe keeping your eye on to kind of have maybe a breakout campaign this season?
Yeah, I'll double down on Rylan Griffin. He's kind of my X factor because both of those games that they lost in those scrimmages, Rylan Griffin played poor. And I've heard from people that in practice he's just not bringing it. And I think that's a little bit about, last year he was just kind of under the radar. If he did good, in one game, great. If he didn't in another, probably didn't notice him a whole lot. But like in the Auburn game, he was a huge game changer. And that's kind of the game where everybody's like, this guy next year is going to be something. Offensively and defensively. But it's different going from the guy that's not asked to do a lot to the guy that's asked to carry a load. And I feel like he's got to buy into being that guy. And once he does, he's going to find some untapped potential that he has. And he's definitely a guy that can swing the Alabama season one way or the other. Now, he can have a semi-bad year and Alabama still make the tournament, but they're not going far without Rylan Griffin being the guy that he's, supposed to be, because a lot of places are looking to him to be in a potential NBA draft pick, whether it be second round or whatnot this upcoming year, just because, like you said, he's 6'6", probably close to 6'7". He's got a nice lean build, great shot, and he plays good defense. So he's a guy that can really turn this team around if they're struggling, and he's a guy that can really possibly put him on his back at times. So he's a guy that is a Swiss Army knife that can do it all, but he's going to have to bring it every night. And along with him, Aaron Estrada is severely, severely, severely underrated. And people are going to find out. Like before we got on here, I looked and he didn't even make the preseason All-SEC first, second, or third team.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they're going to regret that one. They're going to regret it. But yeah, I saw Grant and Mark Sears made the second team, but Aaron Estrada is the best player on this team. And he's going to be. He's going to average 17 to 19 points a game. What he did at Hofstra, yes, people might say it's the CAA, great, but you win Conference Player of the Year 2 times in a row, averaging 20 points on 40% shooting from three. You're good. And he's played great both scrimmages against 2 good defenses, and he's going to be the guy, him and Sears in the backcourt, that's just going to have to carry this team. It's a 1-2 punch. I could see both of them playing, 32, 35 minutes a game. And I think Aaron Estrada will end up being at least All-SEC second team by the end of the year. He's that good.
Yeah, I agree. That was a little bit strange to see. He missed out on one of those teams, and I meant to start with that because that news obviously broke, today on Thursday, which
I
was
got you.
Sears and Grant Nelson, making that getting that accolade preseason, and I think Grant Nelson, has been the headline guy in terms of what he
Mhm.
can offer. His versatility as a forward is exciting. Oates was like, we've done him wrong if we don't get him to the league this year. So his play is definitely valuable too. I am a super big fan of Mark Sears. I obviously,
Mhm.
I'm relatively new to Alabama men's basketball. It's my first big deep dive, having just kind of starting out covering it. But from an outside perspective, last season watching him, I think he's a fantastic player. I think he's
Mhm.
a he seems a little bit, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. He seems a little bit like he can be that glue guy, like and that he was a little bit last year.
Mhm.
He's got that experience at Ohio. I think he's gonna be the one to kind of show these other mid-major transfers how it's done and how to kind of transition your play to a high level like the SEC. I'm a big fan of his. If you've got any thoughts on him and then Nelson as well being
Well,
preseason all
I
SEC.
could talk about Mark Sears all the time. He's from up where I live, Muscle Shoals. So
Oh yes.
I've watched him since he was probably in the 10th grade. I used to watch him and his dad shoot at the YMCA when I worked out. Like, a great family, great guy. He's hard working, and yeah, he's going to be ready first game. It's a little minor injuries, just resting a little bit. But last year, he started off on fire. I mean, he was averaging, I think, 16 points a game at one time, shooting about 42, 43. I mean, that was unsustainable, but he was shooting lights out. And I think he just got tired out at the end of the season, which seemed like a lot of players did playing in this system. So, yeah, he's definitely going to be a glue guy. He's going to be the point guard. He's the only true point guard on this team. So he's going to have to play a lot of minutes. He doesn't have a Javon Quinterly to come in and kind of take the reins for 10 minutes or so at a time. So he's going to be the guy, and I think he's ready for it. I could see him averaging, over 15 points a game. It's going to be not one guy averaging 21, 22 points a game. It's going to be going to have to be Aaron Estrada, Grant Nelson, Mark Sears, all averaging 15 points or more, I think, for this team. And I think it can happen. I didn't mention Grant because I just feel like Grant's going to be Grant. Like he's
Yeah.
going to be a do-it-all rebounder, scorer, facilitator. I mean, he reminds me so much of like how Kevin Durant played the game at Texas. He had his hand on everything, passing, rebounding, scoring. I mean, I could see him. He's not near the scorer Kevin Durant was, but he's going to average probably 15, 9, and 3. I mean, that's really solid stats from your typical 4-man
Oh
in
yeah.
college basketball. So, like, I'm super excited for him as well. But yeah, Mark Sears, I think when I said Aaron Estrada is the best player, it's a tie probably. Aaron Estrada is the best player. It's Mark Sears and Grant Nelson tied for second. No doubt about it. Those three are going to what makes this team go.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious to see what that trio does, and yeah, it's going to be exciting getting into it. I do want to shift a little bit because you are our recruiting guy, and you've had a bit of a tumultuous last couple of weeks with trying to figure out where some of these Alabama prospects are going. But I just want to get your thoughts on this is a great 2023 class by the looks of it, and the way some of these guys seem to have been embedding. Looking at 2024, obviously, Bama's got Aiden Sherrill there, the 4-star power forward coming in. What are some other guys that maybe to keep an eye on, names to just kind of remember? I know we had the Jace Richardson saga, and he ultimately picked Michigan State. And then we have, I believe, Darion Reed as well. But, them and touch on them and some other guys.
Yeah, I lost Jace Richardson, which, his dad went to Michigan State, so that wasn't super surprising. But I thought Alabama was right there with him up until the last day. It was a real toss-up on where he was going to go. And then lost, they were in it pretty good with Asa Newell, who ended up committing to Georgia. And then, Darion Reed. I mean, I've been following this recruitment for, since probably July. When they started getting issued, July, August. And for the past month and a half, it's been Alabama. And it's I thought it was done. Like, I thought it was dead and done. Don't have to worry about this. And then you hear Georgia starting to get back into it, which when you hear that, it's always bad news in the recruiting front. So, yeah, he was supposed to commit. He set his commitment date right after the Alabama visit, and that's kind of what, ticked it that way. But then he postponed his announcement like a day or two before, and ever since, I think Georgia's probably going to land him. But, things can happen. Things can change as they have been with this recruitment. But it's been a roller coaster. I've been wanting to get off, and I can't wait for it to get off or wait for me to get off. I'm starting to get a little sick. But outside of Darian Reed, Billy Richmond, he's a very talented forward. And he's very highly rated on Rivals. And he visited with Darian a couple weeks ago. And it's kind of a Memphis and Alabama battle, and a couple other teams are kind of thrown in there as well. So it could get interesting. I think he'll end up choosing Memphis in the end, but it's really running out of prospects for Alabama in high school, and I feel like that's what they're going to start doing every year with this NIL is swing for the fences on a lot of these big guys, which they landed Aiden Sherrill. If they didn't land Aiden Sherrill, it'd probably be pretty bleak. Probably not get anybody, but they've been right in it, and that's what you want to see is them to land those guys. But I believe Travis Perry, a 2024 point guard from Kentucky, I posted on our board a couple of days ago, is planning to visit, and I confirmed that he is, I believe, this weekend. And he's a 6'2" point guard. He's got a lot of good offers from Michigan and Cincinnati and Florida. Had one at Kentucky at the time. I'm pretty sure that's not going to be a good offer anymore with who they've landed, but he might be a dart throw project type player. I mean, outside of that, I think they're going to swing for the fences for these big guys and then use their allotment of NIL on established transfers. Like I mentioned before, you're not going to win championships with freshmen anymore. It's changed. You're going to win it with a mix of high profile freshmen and transfer portal guys. And I thought Alabama hit it out of the park this year, and I think they'll do it again next year. Just have to keep most of the team together this time, so you don't have to focus solely on transfer portal to fill the whole team. But I think they'll be all right.
Yeah, they're embracing this modern wave of you have a lot looser transfer portal rules, and that is where you can build, that is where you can build championship rosters and championship type players. I mean, it's so wild even looking at like college basketball. I know on Marquette, who's a top 5 team in the country, they've got Tyler Kolek, who was at George Mason. And now, he's one of the better players like in the country. So it's interesting how some of those guys can develop. Final thing, Jordan, I just want to get your prediction. We've got Alabama basketball in 4 days, playing Morehead State, opening up the season. I won't do a score prediction just because, you'd like to hope the score won't be super tight, but you never know. I would like to get your prediction on who you think, or even if you were Oates, what starting 5 do you think we'll see on November 6th for that game?
Well, you can play a lot slower lineup with Morehead because they're bottom 5 in tempo last year. Ooh. And they pretty much returned most of their team. I mean, they're pretty terrible in everything. They do have a big – I mean, I'm not being, mean or anything, but they're they're ranked in the 300s on pretty much every Ken Palm statistic, adjusted offense, defense, or like in the high or low 200s, however you want to look at that, and 280s. But and they were number 2 in luck. So that is something to take into account. But they were a pretty decent team last year. They are projected or predicted to win their conference this year. So it's not like they're some scrub team we just put on the schedule just to get an easy win like a D2 school. Morehead is possibly make the tournament. I mean, they finished 22-12 last year. They were, I believe they only lost 3 conference games and predicted to win the conference this year. They have a big 7-footer from Xavier, Deontay Miles. He's 7 foot 240. So Nick Pringle's going to have his hands full. So probably see a lot of Nick Pringle and McGee if he's healthy. Hopefully he will be because he's a guy that could really match up with him But outside of that, you could play a slow lineup with this team. You don't have to get up and go all the time to kind of defend them. So I could see it being Mark Sears, Aaron Estrada, Rylan Griffin, Grant Nelson, Nick Pringle. That's pretty much the lineup I've been set on for the past month or so, thinking about it. And I think that's probably what they'll go with ultimately. Got to get Rylan Griffin going. This should be a good game to kind of get his confidence back up after the past 2 scrimmages. And get to see Mark Sears and Aaron Estrada play alongside each other, which should be pretty fun.
Yeah, I think I agree. That was the predicted starting lineup I kind of had as well as those 5, and those seem to be the front runners. But I'm curious to see how Oates mixes it up. I mean, he always does, and willing to switch stuff up. But we will see Alabama Morehead State on Monday, November 6th. Very exciting stuff. Yeah, me too. Should be a good one. That I think will just about do it here for this episode. We'll close things off, and we'll be back next week. We'll have a game to recap. We'll finally have basketball. We can get out of the preseason, what's going to happen, and finally some stuff will happen that we can digest. That'll be nice.
Yeah.
Of course, we'll also talk Bama-LSU with that huge football game this weekend. Should be an exciting one. So plenty to dive into next week. For everyone, enjoy the football game on Saturday, and we will see y'all next week.